Hi, Songjian. How are you today?
Yeah, fine. Hi, Mr. Davis. Today I'd like to ask you some question about the speaking skills.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah, sometimes you speak so quick and I can't follow. What can I do?
I think if you're having trouble listening, then you can maybe ask the teacher to repeat again. Or you can ask your friends if they understood. If not, maybe you can raise your hand and ask the teacher, can you please say that again? I didn't understand the first time.
Yeah, but they always say I beg your pardon, but I think it's too common. Is there any other way to
You could also say just pardon. That's the short version. You could say, I'm sorry, or you can say, excuse me. There are a few different ways, but anything is okay, I think.
Yeah, and sometimes when I speak English, I'm so nervous, especially I talk with the foreigners people.
Hmm.
So what can I do?
Okay. If you're nervous, I guess the best way is to practice. To avoid feeling nervous, just have lots of experiences talking to people. Whenever you have a chance, you can try to speak English, to practice speaking English. And I think the more often you say something, then your body, your brain will become more used to it. So you don't need to think so much. You don't need to feel nervous. You can just speak more naturally.
But I don't know what's the topic of our talk. So could you give me some suggestions?
Some things to talk about.
Yeah.
Um, I think always a good thing to talk about is whatever situation you're in. So if you're in class and you want to talk to your classmate who you haven't met before, you can talk about the class, talk about the homework, talk about the teacher. If you are standing in the line to buy groceries and you want to talk to the person behind you, you can talk about groceries or buying food or this supermarket or something like that. If you're waiting at the bus stop and you want to talk to someone else waiting at the bus stop, you can talk about the bus. So I think always a good thing to talk about is the situation that you're in.
The another reason for I'm speaking so nervous because I always make some mistakes during my speaking. So
Hmm.
I don't know how to do.
Okay. I think that's one thing that you don't need to worry about making mistakes, especially when you're speaking to someone. The most important thing is that you can understand each other. And if you make some mistakes and you don't speak perfectly, maybe your grammar is not perfect, your pronunciation is not perfect, that's not so important. What matters is that you can understand each other. Sometimes in writing, it's a little bit more important to have correct grammar and spelling because that can be more difficult to understand. But when you're speaking with someone, when you're having a conversation, as long as you can get your point across, it's not so important to worry about making some small mistakes.
Yeah, I come from Guizhou province. Sometimes I can't distinguish the difference between night and night. Such as this one. Yeah.
Okay. So light with an L and night with an N.
Yeah.
Okay. I think sometimes it can be hard to hear and sometimes also to say some sounds that are not in your native language. So that can be a problem for a lot of people. But usually you can help to figure out the word by the context of where the word is being said. So if someone says, uh, please turn off the lights, you can guess which one that is. Or if someone says, okay, have a good night, then you can guess which one that is. So I think it's can be quite tough to really force yourself to make the right sound. That can be something that just takes a lot of time and experience with practicing English, and then over time you can get to realize those differences and to understand them and do them yourself. But for the beginning, I think the easiest way is just to think about what are the other words around that, which one makes more sense there, and then people will be able to guess your meaning and you can guess their meaning as well from that.
Yeah. And for some people, especially in some poor province, there were not so many foreigner friends around them.
Mm-hmm.
And they always talk with the Chinese people. How do they practice speaking with Chinese people?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's not so important that you have to always speak to other um, native speakers because English is being used around the world with people of every country. So, for example, Chinese people may speak with people from Thailand and use English in that case. So it's not so important to find native speakers. I think it's good to find anyone to practice speaking with. And if where you live you don't have anyone who speaks English around you, a good way is to use the internet. You can find some partners that way, language exchange partners, where you can speak English. Maybe someone who is an English speaker wants to learn Chinese, and you can exchange your languages that way. You can both practice. So I think that can be a very good way if you live somewhere where there are not people who speak the language you want to learn.
Yeah, and I like the American movies very much,
Mm-hmm.
and I wanted to speak as a native speaker, but I don't know how to do.
Okay. One thing that's quite important for pronunciation that many people don't realize. So, of course, one thing is the sounds, making the correct sounds of each letter. But that can be sometimes a little bit difficult. One other part that many people overlook is having the right intonation. So that's when your voice goes up and down within the words, and also the stress, the correct stress patterns for each word. Should you emphasize the beginning, the middle, the end? So one really good way to practice pronunciation, to copy um, American pronunciation, for example, if you play the movie and then when you hear someone say a line, you try to say it exactly how that person said it. So the same intonation, the same parts that are louder and softer, the same parts that are stressed and not stressed. And then eventually over time, you can start to mirror that person. So if you know this movie very well, you can play the movie and you can say it at the same time as the actor is saying it. And that way, you will get the more natural pronunciation if you can say it exactly the same way the actor says it. So that can be a good thing to practice.
And do you have any experiences in learning a foreign language? And could you give me some advice?
Mm-hmm. Okay. I have learned a few different foreign languages. One of them is Japanese, and I learned that first of all, I visited Japan and I studied there for a little bit and learned Japanese, but I also studied Japanese at home in Canada for about 6 months at university. And when I was there, I didn't have any Japanese speakers to practice with all the time, but I was still able to practice using a grammar textbook and also learning lots of vocabulary words. And then I, I was able to build up some skills doing that. And then when I went to Japan again later, I moved there and I was able to speak and practice a bit more that way. So I think it can be useful to build up that base of vocabulary and grammar. And then when you get a chance to travel to that place or to talk to someone who uses that language, then you already have a head start. And it's a bit more natural that way.
Yeah, but sometimes for me it's difficult to remember the vocabulary.
Mm-hmm.
I can forget them easily, right?
Mm-hmm.
What can I do?
I think a really good way to practice vocabulary is to use flashcards. And this is something that many people have been doing for a long time. But you take a card, on one side you write the English, on the other side you write the Chinese, or whatever your language is. And then you uh, make a lot of these cards with the important vocabulary. And when you're practicing, you look at one side and try to remember the other side. But the important thing is you should do it both ways. You should practice by looking at the English and trying to remember the Chinese, but also by looking at the Chinese and trying to remember the English. That way you can practice both understanding other people's words that they use and also using the correct word that you want to say. So it's quite important to practice both sides. That's something that many people don't do, but that can really help you.
Yeah, could you tell me the difference between the American English and the British English?
Differences in understanding or in speaking?
Yes, in speaking.
Well, there are some differences in the vowel sounds between American English and British English. They will say the vowels a little bit differently. Also, with words where the last sound is the letter R, in British English they usually do not pronounce the R, but Americans will. But there are also some differences in vocabulary. For example, in America, you might say a truck. In the UK, you might say a lorry. In America, you might say an elevator. In the UK, you would say a lift. So there are some differences in vocabulary as well, and that can be a little bit confusing sometimes for people who only know one kind of English, and then they go to the other place and they don't understand some words. So as far as understanding the difference in pronunciation, I think this is something that will just happen by experience. So the more you can practice listening to many people who speak American English and also listening to many people who speak British English and Australian and New Zealand and South African and everywhere, people who speak all different kinds of English, that will really help to improve your ability to understand. If you always listen to American English speakers because you like American movies, it may be difficult for you to understand other people. So a good idea is to listen to speakers from all different places and really improve your listening ability.
Okay, thank you for your advice. I think I can speak better in the future.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah.
Good luck with your studies.